It was a long, torturous weekend in the mountains of Colorado for Detective Nash Gurley. On Friday, it looked like he'd finally cut a deal with Travis Forbes to reveal what happened to Kenya Monet. But just hours later, Gurley got a call. The deal was dead.
I was devastated. I hung up the phone. My wife looked at me and she says, "You okay?" And I looked at her and I'm crying. I said, "There's nothing more I could do." I got him there. I led him there. I led him to the trough.
Gurley and his wife went on their trip anyway, and for 3 long days he was left twisting in the wind once again by Travis Forbes. Kenya's family knew nothing of this, still holding out hope that she was somehow alive.
Every time I was driving down the street and I seen a skinny little black-haired girl, I can't tell you how many accidents I've almost had trying to get around a corner to see who this little skinny black-haired girl is. There were still reports coming up in of sightings of her, and you've got to turn in all these sightings because you don't know.
But then something happened to Travis Forbes that weekend. He apparently had second thoughts about his own second thoughts.
And when I got back on Monday, I got a call and they said, "Deal's back on, it's being finalized, we should be able to be going next week."
Sometimes taking a weekend away is quite profitable.
Yes. The weight of the world just got lifted from me.
The deal with Travis was quite straightforward. No death penalty, no sex crime charges. And in exchange, he would give them a complete confession, what he did to Kenya and Lydia. And one more thing, he would show them exactly where Kenya was. And so on a humid morning in September of 2011, Forbes found himself in a procession of police cars on a country road northeast of Denver. Investigators had been here many times before, searching the fields near the farm town of Keensburg looking for Kenya. But this day, Travis had solemnly promised he was going to show them. Trailing a car behind Travis was DA Carrie Lombardi, nervous, anxious, and pessimistic.
I was worried he wouldn't follow through because I felt like he sort of liked this game, I thought.
So along the way, what were you thinking?
Will he do this? Will he not? Will something spook him? Will he change his mind? Is this a big farce? I didn't know if, there was even, if we were even going to the right place.
Travis was in the lead car, which included Detectives Nash Gurley and Jacqueline Shackley.
It was really quiet for the first 5 or 10 minutes, and he was sitting right next to me. Well, I had an air cast on my foot because I had a running injury. He looked down and he said, "What did you do to your foot?" And I said, "It's a stress fracture from running."
And that got Travis talking about running marathons, movies, food, all sorts of things.
And obviously we were talking about whatever he wanted to talk about to keep his cooperation. But I have to remember that I have a monster sitting next to me and just playing it up. We had to get to that body. We wanted to know where she was and bring her home to her family.
Then we start getting closer. He starts getting a little bit more quiet. We drive out to the site next to a little grove of trees.
And then quite suddenly, no warning, something came over the cool and breezy Travis Forbes.
He got out of the car and his whole demeanor changed. He let out this scream. Just this blood curdle. It made me jump. I wasn't expecting it at all.
But just as quickly, Travis pulled himself together and pointed.
He says, "She's over there." So we walk over there and he's standing up on top of the hill and there's like a little ravine. And he says, "You're standing right on top of her."
Soon the digging began.
And it was a very, very slow process. There was an anthropologist there. And so then they finally got the dirt off of her and there she was, and it was pretty awful. I stood there and of course I'd seen these beautiful pictures of her. There's this smiling image in your head of her having a good time and smiling, and then to see that, it was very difficult.
There was something else, perhaps even more difficult, that Carrie Lombardi had to do.
I called Tony Lee and said, that they had found a body where he had told us she was, we had found something.
And I needed to let my family know before any of this hit the news. You can't prepare yourself or practice yourself or write down a speech for that day. And I had to tell her.
What was that like?
That was the hardest thing that I've ever done. And I had
But
to
she
go.
had been hanging on to hope.
She had been hanging on to that hope.
You
I
had to
I had
finally.
to snatch that rug out from under her. And she lost it. And there was nothing I could do for her because I had already lost it myself.
Then Tony had to tell his children, Kenya's little sister and brother.
And the first question out of both of their mouths at the different times, is she alive? And I had to tell them no. And I couldn't do nothing for them.
I just don't feel like it's fair that people get to grow up with their sisters, but she was only there for a little bit of my life. Like, she won't be able to see, like, me grow up and get married or have kids, and I won't be able to see her grow up and get married and have kids. Like, we just never get to have that bond.
But this most horrendous of days wasn't quite over. Police still needed a complete confession from Forbes on tape.
While we're driving back, I look back at him, he goes, "Hey Nash, I told you I'd tell you where she was." He goes, "Are you happy you found her?" He goes, "Are you happy?" And I said, "There's some questions that need to be answered." And I said, once those questions are answered, then I'll be happy. "All right, Nash, I told you I'd do it. I told you I would do it." And I said, "Yes, you did."
Detective Goulet sat down with Travis for one last interview. After 5 long months, out came the words he needed to hear.
I killed her. I did not mean to kill her. I didn't pull over to kill her. I didn't pull over to rape her. None of that was in my head. None of it was premeditated.
But then, it all came out. Travis told them how he spotted Kenya on the street, how he raped her, how he strangled her, how he stuffed her in his cooler, drove around with the body in his white van for a whole day, then stored it in the bakery's freezer while he cleaned out his van with bleach and burned her clothes. And then, early the next morning, he buried her body near a clump of cottonwood trees.
After we were done with our interview, I walked up to him and stuck out my hand. I go, "Thanks." And he stood up, shook my hand, and he said, "I told you I would do it." I said, "You did." He says, "You just wouldn't give up." And I looked at him and I said, "You're right."
Later that day, Travis also confessed to the attempted murder of Lydia Tillman. Soon he would be sentenced separately for both crimes. But there was one last surprise coming. Something no one saw coming, least of all Travis Forbes.
Coming up, a courtroom stunned.
To do what she did and to endure what she went through, I couldn't imagine. She's a superhero in my eyes.